So joining me today is Catherine Porth, and I'm so excited to speak with you because normally I say the person and then I say their title, but you've got a lot of titles. So, founder of Let Her Speak, director of insights and development at Knoxville Entrepreneur Center, wearer of all hats. You have a consulting firm as well. You're like the original boss babe. You are. I'm interested in speaking with you because there are so many women who may be watching who may carry kind of self-doubt in the business world in terms of like, where's my path going? And you give women clarity. That's the way I see it. So tell me a little bit about how did you get into business?
I like to say that I was born to be in business. It's been a part of my life. As far back as I can remember, so I came from a farming family, but farming is a business.
That's right.
It is absolutely a business. So my family have been farmers in the Midwest since the very first of our ancestors came over from Germany in the 1800s. So we've always been very stubborn, nose to the grindstone, we want to be our own boss types of people. And I think I just inherited that from my family. And so when I was born, my dad was, or still is, a lawyer. And so I grew up working at his law firm. And so I always saw my dad being his own boss and running this firm and growing this firm from, I think when I was born, they were maybe a year into starting the law firm that he's been a partner and founder of since the 80s. And so growing up in that world and having my grandparents and my uncles and most people in my family being entrepreneurial or in business. My aunts are in auditing and strategic management.
Okay.
And
Those are great mentors to have.
Yes,
in the
yes,
family.
exactly. Very much boss women in their own right. And so it was always around me. And so it was just a foregone conclusion that I too was going to go into business. I have a head for it. I get it. I've been around it for so long. It's something that comes, for lack of a better term, naturally to me. But I'm also just always so curious about business because business is really about humans. Yes, you have your traditional concepts of understanding the financials of it and understanding marketing and logistics and all these elements that have been a part of business for so long, but it's always evolving, always changing because humans are always evolving, always changing, and so you're always trying to find the next solution to somebody's problem, and our problems evolve over time. So that's why I've always just loved business because it's so changeable and it grows over time, and it's something that also can help people really solve a lot of problems, but can also do a lot of good. Obviously, there are stories of it not doing very good.
Right.
But my goal is to get more people that are doing good in the business world.
So at what point in your career, because you stuck with it for a while, what point did you realize, I think I need a change or something has to happen differently?
So I think I always knew that. I remember when I was graduating from college, marketing and entrepreneurship were my majors in college, and that has been steadfast. I knew I was going to go into marketing when I was about 13 years old. I thought I was going to go into law, and then I decided, no, my brain is more equipped for business.
So wait, at 13, I wanted to be a fashion designer. At 13, you wanted to go into law? I mean, not into law, but into business and marketing?
Business, yes, I started researching business schools when I was 13. I remember sitting in the computer lab at my middle school and researching these different schools that had great business programs and trying to decide where I wanted to go. I'm the type of person who's always thinking 10 years in advance of where I am right now. And so I knew that was what I was going to do and started researching at that point. And so I'm one of those anomalies that I knew very early, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to go into, but I didn't quite know how my unique skill sets actually fit into this world.
Okay.
At the time, I thought I was going to become a marketing manager and I was going to work for a Fortune 500 company. And then once I graduated from college, I knew that I had grown so passionate about working with entrepreneurs because through my program, I got to work with several of them and do projects with them. I worked with a luthier, who's a guitar maker, who made these gorgeous instruments that were more works of art than something that people use. And I just really loved helping to understand, how do you talk to folks that are used to Gibsons and
Right.
all of these well-known brands, and to have someone come in who is an artist that creates these musical instruments. How do you market those? How do you go to market? How do you find your people? And that was one of the most fun projects I did throughout the 4 years I was in school. And so I knew that lit me up, but I also graduated at the height of the economic recession.
Oh, wow.
And so entrepreneurship was extremely tricky, and I also didn't know what my place was in that world. I was 22. I didn't have a lot of experience besides the projects that I had worked on. And so I knew instinctually Fortune 500 was not actually where I belonged, that the world of us, us scrappy, scruffy entrepreneurs that are stubborn and would rather work 80 hours for ourselves than 40 hours for anybody else. Yeah. I knew that that's who I was, but at the time, it didn't make sense for me to go into something because I didn't know what that was. So I did end up going into working for Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies for not quite 10 years. But I treated that more as an opportunity. I consider it more like my Steve Jobs mentality of, I'm going to just pick and choose all of these different types of experiences that I can have, all of these new things that I can learn. And knowing about insurance has never once been something that I regret. It's very, very helpful to understand how insurance works. And so, I worked for Geico for a while. And so I still understand what insurance policies mean when I read them, which
oh my gosh,
is nice.
Let me add you to my friends list.
Yeah.
Help out.
And I understand how underwriting works and actuarial science. I understand how those things work, which is something that impacts everybody's lives. And then I started working for a manufacturer of commercial furniture, and so I started understanding manufacturing processes and supply chain logistics. Mechanical engineering. I would go into our manufacturing plants, and I was always so intrigued by watching all of these machines and how they all operate. Everything from the paint rooms to the CNC machines that they were working on to the 3D printing specs that they were doing when they were experimenting with some new designs. I got to see and experience all of that. Even though I was working in the sales department, I had the opportunities to be able to interact with a lot of folks from across all of these different professions and expertise. And so I started collecting all of this knowledge of just knowing enough to be dangerous. There's no way I could ever do that professionally, but I understood enough that I could empathize with where each person had their own struggles or frustrations in their world, and the ways in which, at least in my role in sales, because when you're in corporate environments, it's very common to work in silos.
Okay.
And so I took it upon myself to break out of that silo, to empathize and understand that it's not as easy as we might think that it is to make certain things happen, especially in the manufacturing world. And also, we're trying to solve problems for clients and customers. So if we can talk and communicate with each other, if we can understand each other of what your performance review is going to reflect for you and what my performance review will reflect for me, and how we're both equally in this goal of growing the company, we can do a lot of really great things. And so I learned that relationship development was very much a strength of mine. Because I came at it from not so much what can you do for me, but I want to understand. I'm so curious about what you do and what you're working on and how your day looks. And so even though I never thought I would go into sales, I ended up being very good at it because I'm just a naturally curious person, and I want to help all the time. Whatever I can do to help somebody else out. And so I was in that for a while, but I finally hit a point when I was in corporate America of, I don't want my path dictated for me. I don't want this, you hit this level, and then after so long of performance reviews, you hit this level and that level, and if somebody likes you, you might get into a VP role.
That's right.
I didn't like the feeling of feeling like I can't speak out if I see something that I think could be better. Because I'm the type to be, I'm very honest. I'm kind, but I'm honest about if there's something that I can see that could be better, I want to make it better. I can't sit by the sidelines and just watch something fail when I know I could help be a part of the change in what was happening. And so I, fortunately, at the exact same time, had met a brilliant scientist who ended up becoming my husband, who worked.
That worked out.
It did. That worked out very nicely. But he was finishing up his postdoc at Oak Ridge National Lab, and I was at this precipice of, I need to get out. There's something more for me out there. There's something that I can do and I can challenge and I can disrupt. But I don't think I can do it within the confines of a corporation. I think it needs to be my own thing. And so I made the leap of moving from, I was living in my home state of Iowa at the time and moved down to Knoxville, Tennessee, to see, for one thing, about this relationship that we had been in for over a year. We had been long distance, and also to hit the reset button on going back to my roots of loving entrepreneurship and loving to work with entrepreneurs and loving that world, the messy world of chaos and not having all the answers and having to do it anyway and experimenting all the time. And I chose to go back and get my MBA at that period. So I went to University of Tennessee, and it was when I was between leaving the corporate world and going back to school that I had a moment to take a breath and reflect on all of this experience I had had as a woman in business, and a woman who knew business was going to be her life for the long run, and how could I help other women through situations that I had been through, the biases. And
see, that's what I was going to ask before you talk about your change into your next chapter. What was it like working in corporate America and working for these different businesses? Because I'm hearing you talk and you're like, I've got all these ideas, and if I see something, that's not always met kindly in the workplace.
Yes.
So what were some of your experiences as a woman in business?
It was very much a constant push-pull of being too much and then having to constantly pull back. And I would get really excited and want to do something, or if I saw something that I didn't think was right, I'm not the type to just turn a blind eye to that. There was situations of when you're in sales, there's a lot of after-work parties that you're expected to go to, especially when you are working in account management and you're working with massive accounts of folks. There is the archetype of salespeople love to go out and have fun, and that is very much true. And so there's situations that women in sales find themselves in, that there is harassment, and having to see I was fortunate that it never personally happened to me, but it happened to the women in my department. And speaking up to management about that, and we would collectively speak up to them, and then nothing happened. Nothing was said, nothing was done. It was more of like, they're our major account. We can't push back on them. They're too big. They would wreck our company if we lost the revenue that we got from these accounts. And so it became, okay, that is, I understand now, that is what our place is in this department. There was other issues of, we would call it the frat house, even though there was quite a few women in the sales department. It wasn't like it was 2 women and the rest were all men, but in a 50-person team, it was about, I'd say about 15 to 20 women. So we were almost 50% of the entire team. And yet you would consistently, at that time in that company, you would consistently see favoritism. but you would see that the women would take on a lot of the work that was not shown in performance reviews. So like the birthday parties and the celebrations and the doing team outings to build camaraderie, being the encyclopedias for everybody else. You know, I would struggle to get all the work done that I needed to do because people would constantly be coming to my desk asking me questions because I was the encyclopedia of how do things work, where do I go, who do I talk to, this person has this issue, how do I solve it? You know, I was the person who had the answers, but that doesn't get reflected in a performance review. My revenue goals get reflected in my performance reviews. It doesn't matter that I became, to some degree, for some of my accounts that I worked with and who were my clients, that I, to some degree, became a therapist for them. They would call me when they were having a rough sales day and they just needed a pep talk, and they wanted someone that they knew would listen to them and they could just unload all of life on this person. And I wouldn't just talk about business, I would talk about them and who they are, because they're a human being out, you know, hitting the streets, trying to sell my product for me, because I'm internally working with them. But that doesn't get reported in performance reviews either. How much your accounts are loyal to you is not something that's easily countable and easily trackable. So
a lot of women are they're going to be shaking their heads while watching this, like, I can relate.
Yes, yeah. So these things do not get celebrated, and when you are seen as someone who speaks up and gives an opinion, like I remember being assigned a new territory, and it was a territory that I knew from previous folks that had that territory. It was extremely difficult, and they were adding it to my other territory.
Oh wow!
So it's not that I was getting paid extra for it. My bonus compensation wasn't changing. I just was seen as being so good at what I did. Why not just pile more on? Because we know she can handle it. And when I
penalized for being good.
Exactly. And when I spoke up about it, at the time I didn't understand that I was approaching a burnout, and that I just knew that I couldn't handle more, and that it was going to be thankless. I was going to do all of this work, and for what? It didn't feel like it was a mutual benefit. It felt very one-sided, and because I vocalized that I had an issue with that, I remember the managers started changing their tune to how they spoke to me. I was no longer this, the celebrated person who in the department that, was very good at her job and was the go-to. There was a award ceremony every year too about who's the number one in the department. I remember that year not getting it, and it going to the person who never said anything. He just took whatever got piled on, he just took it with a smile and never really spoke up about anything. And so I remember that being a huge turning point of, I think it's time for me to go somewhere else.
Is that how Let Her Speak came to be?
It was the initial spark. I think it hit. There was a nerve that was hit when that was happening, and another nerve that was hit when a woman who was a VP at that company, who I considered a mentor of mine. I mean, this woman, talk about a powerful woman. She was one of very few women at the top. I think there was one woman that was at the top in human resources, and then she was at the top in sales, which is very rare to see a woman, especially we're talking about something that was 10 years ago.
Okay.
It's very rare to see a woman that is the top, beside, not the CEO, but second in command in sales and marketing.
Okay.
You don't always see that, at least back then. And she also would speak up and would not just go with the flow. If she had an opinion, she would vocalize that opinion. If she felt like something wasn't being done correctly, or that it wasn't beneficial to our clients, and it felt too one-sided, she would say something about it. And it finally got to the point where from my perspective and my experience, that she just spoke up too often and was seen as being too difficult, that she was forced into early retirement. just was let go. I mean, it was announced, I think, on Wednesday, and she was gone on Friday. She's not retired. She's working. She's now higher up at another company. She wasn't retiring, but that's the story that they wanted all of us to know, even though I knew her well enough to know that was not what happened. So it was all of these things that kept getting piled on that I recognized that all of us were experiencing these same things, but none of us could really talk about it. It was through looks or coded messages to each other of just these underlying frustrations, and a lot of women were leaving my department at this time. I mean, almost every single one of my friends left before I ended up calling it quits.
So then take me to Let Her Speak, because obviously the name of it really speaks to your experience. Let Her Speak.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that was always there, but I think I needed to take the breath that I had between leaving that job and going back to school to fully understand what it was that I had experienced over that nearly 10-year span of being a woman in business, being a woman in college in business, and then being a woman in a full-time career in business, and what it was that I had actually experienced, and what was it that all the women around me were experiencing. And at the same time, so I had moved to Knoxville at this point, and I knew no one except for my now husband. And I was going to all of these different types of events, networking opportunities, just to try to find where are my people, so I can start cultivating this friend group. And at the time, when I was going to a lot of these meetups and these groups, I never felt like I got to know the women that were in that room. It always felt very much
kind of surface.
Surface level. What's your title? Giving your business card, and it never really dove too much deeper than that. And it also felt very siloed. I'm someone that has worked in a multitude of different types of industries, so I can easily walk into a room of women in tech and I can speak tech. I can walk into a room with women and that are in even in media, even though I've never worked in media, but I am curious. I'm a very curious person, so I can at least walk in and strike up a conversation because I understand enough of that industry to ask questions and really get to understand that industry. Women in finance, I haven't worked in finance, but I know finance, and I had to do a lot of financial things in some of my corporate world because insurance and finance go hand in hand. And so I was able to strike up these conversations, but I was recognizing that none of these women knew each other in these silos, but we were all talking about the exact same thing. We were all having the exact same frustrations. We were all seeing the exact same biases. We were all struggling with confidence, imposter syndrome, to some degree bullying in the workplace. We were self-doubt, feeling guilty, taking on too many things because we're the women, and so we're the ones that see all of these things, and so feel like, okay, well, the guys aren't going to do it, so I guess we have to be the ones that do these things. I was seeing it everywhere, and yet they weren't talking to each other across these silos. So it was the same thing as I saw in corporate of across these silos of supply chain and manufacturing and customer service and sales, that it was the exact same thing, just in more social circumstances. And so that helped feed more of a model around what was it. I knew I wanted to do something to help women, and for us to not feel so isolated, and that we could speak openly about these things that we can't talk about at work, or we can't, or that maybe our social circles, because our friends are in different realms, that they might not get it, or they're not experiencing those same things. How can we bring women that are in different entities of business together to have these types of conversations and to feel like we we are not alone, and that there's a lot of really good ideas and really interesting perspectives that when you break out of those silos, it becomes a much more robust conversation, besides just hearing, talking in circles every single time with your fellow women that are all in the financial realm, because we're all, it's all the same thing, all the same at the same time, but to recognize like, oh, you are facing this too in your industry, and you are facing this in your industry. We're all facing the exact same thing. And so that's really where Let Her Speak really started to become, have a model and a specific idea around it, was having these conversations with women. I ended up interviewing, so this would have been the summer of 2017, that I had this breath that I could take, and I interviewed as many women as I possibly could in Knoxville, and I interviewed a lot of men too, these men that were also seeing the same thing, and they just didn't know how they could help.
Oh, that's interesting, to do both sides.
Yeah. And a lot of them also, they wanted to help, and they weren't quite sure how, but they knew a lot of other women that would want to talk to me too. So they also became a huge part of growing my network and growing my connections and speaking to women that I might not have been able to, that I didn't even know existed, but that a lot of these men that were allies were saying, what you're doing is, I think this woman would be really interested in this too, so I want to introduce you to her so you can talk.
So were you just interviewing them about their career stories, like what they were seeing on their jobs, or what were these interviews centered on?
We got pretty deep in a lot of these, and we would be at coffee shops or at lunch, and I had a notebook, and I still have this notebook, and that was my interview notebook that I would scribble as they were telling me stories. I would start writing down notes, underlying keywords that I was hearing over and over again, or concepts I was hearing over and over again. And some of them who had been in Knoxville for a long time, they would give me context of what has the evolution of the city looked like for women, where from their childhood, how have they seen it grow and change, and what are the things that have been tried and have failed, what are the biggest areas of opportunities they see, what hopes do they have for our city, and what do they think should be done about that? What ideas do they have? Some of them, were relatively new to the city, just like me, and so we talked more about where did they come from, and now that they're in Knoxville, what have they experienced as being a newbie in the city, and what are they seeing from an outsider's perspective of what's going really well, and what are things that they've learned from these other areas that they've come from that might be beneficial for the city, or has been tried out in other cities and it worked really well. And so I was basically collecting as much information as possible, and every single woman got very real very quickly in these conversations of, this is my personal story of what I've struggled with and what I'm really frustrated about, and what lights a fire in me, and that I want to change, but we need a collective to be able to do that. Me just shouting into the void and being, determined as being the woman that only complains.
Right.
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 What can we do? There was a lot of talk of the Good Old Boys Network that was very strong, and how can women break into that, or how can we be a part of those conversations that need to be happening, where we need to be in these rooms too. There's a lot of decisions being made for us without any of us giving input into any of these situations. And they are greatly affecting most of us, and the effect on us is not being taken into consideration. And I was talking with both women that were in corporate, women that were in healthcare, in nonprofit, in entrepreneurship. It was the entire spectrum of business, which is on purpose. I made it a very broad spectrum when I talk about women in business, because it's so similar. It doesn't matter if you're a solopreneur, or you're an executive director in a nonprofit, or you are a VP in corporate. There are similarities and stories that we can all share, that a lot of us can shake their heads and be like, yep, I've experienced that too.
My girlfriends and I always say, we're all just out here living the same life.
Yep.
You know,
Exactly.
whether it's at work or at home, we all kind of, the underlying theme is kind of the same for a lot of women.
Yes, exactly. And yet it feels like you can finally take a breath when you hear another woman say something that you have also experienced. Like, oh, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I can actually exhale.
Yeah.
And talk to someone about this. And so these interviews that I was having with these women led me to the concept of from when you step back and look at it, it's an extremely simple concept, but it came from a lot of research of not just interviewing these women, but also diving into studies that had been done about women and communication and speaking up and women in business, biases in the workplace. I looked at a ton of journal papers about this. And then I also obviously had my own personal experience, but I also looked out at what existed now that was out there because it was very obvious to me that there was a gap. There was a glaring need for something different that was not being taken care of by something else that already existed.
Okay.
And one of the things that I saw that was both my personal experience, but a lot of women's, is that even going to a lot of different events that are meant for women, you never really dive deep into conversations with it. Oftentimes you don't feel like you have the permission and the space to be able to dive deep into these tough conversations that you would be so therapeutic and so healing to be able to do, but you don't want to be the weird one that brings up these topics, these dark, deep topics that not everybody's ready to have a conversation about. So that's where I started, was what if I created the space that was the intent and that was the expectation, was you're going to, number one, hear stories from women that are local. It's not going to be a woman who comes in to town for a day and then leaves and you never see her again. I mean, there's incredible motivational speakers out there, incredible keynote speakers, and they absolutely serve a huge purpose and can really light a fire under people. But then we often forget that the people that we pass in the grocery store also have a story. And their stories can be extremely powerful, and sometimes they can be even more impactful because they're right here with you in this city. They are there with you, right. And so that's what I really wanted, was to have women that most people might not even know are in this city, the stories and the experiences that they have had, and giving them the opportunity to share something that maybe they've never even had the opportunity to talk about. And the very first event in March of 2018 was just that. There's several women that now are pretty well known in circles within Knoxville, Booth Andrews being one of them, Samantha Lane being another. These women, the very first time they shared these raw stories that they now share openly, honestly, all the time, the very first Let Her Speak event in March 2018 was the very first time they ever shared those stories. Because there had just never been an opportunity to speak so vulnerably and authentically about something that was related to everything about them. It just wasn't something that necessarily was always asked to be talked about, because most of the time you're asked to come in and speak about what are some tactical time management skills that we can do. Right. What are some practices that we should take in order for our mental health and burnout. And so we're always looking for tactical things, but without asking about the context of why are you so passionate about time management? Why are you so passionate about burnout? Where did that fire come from? Because it came from somewhere. And a lot of times that can be even more impactful than understanding getting the advice of the tactical things you can do, but instead truly hearing that this woman hit a place that for her was rock bottom, and how she rose up from that and has now made that a part of her life to be able to make sure no other woman and no other person goes through what she had to go through.
Oh my goodness. So, you fast forward from inception to today, would you ever have guessed that Let Her Speak would be where it is right now? I mean, you all have a very thriving program. You've got mentorship. I mean, I was looking over everything, and there's some real resources for women right here in Knoxville.
No, the short answer is no. I had no intention. If I would have, even though when I was a teenager, I knew that entrepreneurship would be my path at some point. If you would have told me that you were going to be a nonprofit founder of a women's empowerment movement, I would have been like, what?
Yeah.
There's no way. Me? Why would I never really saw that in myself. Now, looking back, hindsight being 2020, it all makes sense.
Right.
Just because I am someone who pushes buttons. I am someone that questions. I am someone who's curious, who loves relationships, who loves to build things, and I love to teach and train and work with others and see that growth. At the time that I founded this, so to give some context, I had started my graduate program in fall of 2017. The only time I could host this Let Her Speak concept event was during my spring break of grad school. So instead of, I think most of my classmates went to, I think like Jamaica or
I was going to say
Dominican.
Cabo, St. Lucas.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. They got to go to the sunshiny areas. I stayed in Knoxville and hosted this event, which I would never take back in a million years. It was the most uplifting moment in my life that I had created something from inception to actually doing it. But I always thought it would just be a passion project, and it would just be something that I do on the side, almost like a hobby, and but that my career, my real work would be over here and something else. And I had I had started working with a tech startup during my grad program as well, and I thought working in the startup world made a lot of sense for me. I had a lot of experience in a multitude of different areas. I understood how companies function. I understood entrepreneurship. I understood the startup world. I got all of that. And so I thought that would be a big part of what my career trajectory was going to be.
Okay.
And then in early 2020, so this was before lockdown and before COVID became widespread, I made the difficult decision that Let Her Speak is, I'm not treating her with the respect and the focus, of just how big she could be and the impact that she could really have on the world. I was playing it too small with what it was that I had created, and I was not even taking into consideration the amount of heart and passion that I had for doing this work, because it didn't feel like work to me. It felt like something that I just had to do. And so in early 2020, I decided to leave the startup world and working with this tech company I had been with for a few years, and to go all in on growing Let Her Speak and seeing what it was that she could really become. And then shutdown happened.
And the world closes down.
The world closes down. It ended up being actually a great opportunity, though, for me to take another breath, because I realized that I had been going for. I got back into I can easily become a workaholic without even thinking about it. I'm just a doer. I'll just go until something forces me to stop.
Yes.
And so it ended up being for me the stop that I needed, and to really understand what it was that I had actually built, because I had this this rough concept that we need more of these conversations. We need a space where women can share these things very openly, to not gatekeep. You don't have to be at a certain level of professionalism or have a certain title in order to be seen, heard, and valued within our community, because we value every single woman. And to give women the opportunities to use our platform as their platform, because Let Her Speak has never been the Catherine show, and it will never be. I mean, I try to keep my face off of as much as I can, even though most of my friend group is adamant that I need to be out there more.
But I mean, I get what they're saying, but I get what you're saying, to let it be more about the women.
Yes, exactly, and so finding that balance. And so during the pandemic, I did even more research, dived even deeper, and I continued to interview women, but it then became women all across the country. because we were all in front of our computers. And I found myself a part of this community of women that spanned from Florida, New York to California, that we all just wanted to meet other women all across the city, and so or all across the country. So we would connect each other to other women that we thought were really neat and doing really amazing things, and be able to share stories with each other of, what are you doing? This is what I'm doing. This is where my fire comes from. Where does your fire come from? I spoke to a woman in Arizona who actually came to Knoxville not that long ago and was the keynote speaker for United Way's conference. And so she's all about disrupting the nonprofit sector and the changes that need to be made in that area. And she's now a dear friend of mine. I spoke with a woman who's an author and speaker who lost her husband in 9/11. And she has been a voice for what grief looks like, especially during that, time that all of us remember where we were when that happened. And so I got to listen to her and her story and what she's taken that loss and that grief and translated it into, and what she's put her heart into. Just these amazing women all over the place. And I started recognizing that what I had actually built, while it was still there, what I had built, I just didn't fully recognize it, was that I had actually built something that was for women who are leaders, but might not be recognized by traditional standards as being a leader. They were women that wanted to do things differently. They were disruptors in their own right. They see the world and they see how it can be better, and they see what needs to change and what needs to be knocked down and torn down and built back up. And that the spaces that they had been occupying until they found that voice was not conducive to them being able to really make these changes in the world. The other thing, though, that I also recognized during this time period was that a lot of women were leaving their jobs because somebody has to be the one that stays at home with the kids, that teaches the kids, that essentially becomes a nurse and a healthcare provider, that takes care of the home, and most of that fell to the women. And a lot of the gains that we had made as far as pay gap, the wealth gap, these advances in the positions that we had, the amount of money women were raising for their companies, all went backwards over the span of 2 years.
Never thought about that. You're right.
Yeah. And it was disheartening to see that these little incremental steps and advancements that we had been celebrating all got wiped out within a span of 2 years. And so we'd have to build back. And I've always been very passionate about finances and wellness around finances, and women understanding their worth and understanding that we need to be asking for more. Whatever we think we should be earning, it's probably undercutting and undervaluing what it is that we can actually do. And so during this time period too, that's became another focus, was growing women's wealth.
Okay.
Because when you look at wealth and you look at those with wealth, there's a lot of influence that comes with that. There's a lot of power that comes with that, and there's a lot of good for the community. And when you look at women that hold wealth, a lot of times they do a lot more altruistic things with their money.
Yes.
They do a lot more investment into the community. They do a lot more philanthropic work.
Giving to nonprofits, all the things. Yes.
All of the things. The one area, though, that you don't see it in is investing in other companies. And predominantly women invest in other women, but if you don't have any women investors, that's part of the issue of not having too many women startups that are getting funding. And we continue to see just a teeny tiny percentage of funding that goes to women-owned startups and businesses. Of the whole, a very small percentage is actually going to women. And so that became another part of where I saw that women can be using their voices is, number one, let's help out with understanding what is wealth. How do you grow wealth? Because the wealth gap, while the pay gap has shrunk, the wealth gap is still huge, and it feels almost insurmountable, that the amount of money that women in their careers with is a small percentage of what a majority of men end their career with. And we also statistically live longer.
Right.
So we have to so we live longer on less.
With less, yes.
And then you also see that, you know, wealth can also change communities. It can completely flip around neighborhoods. It can do so much for a community, but if you don't have folks that represent the areas of communities that need to be changed in the wealthier folks in a community, then a lot of that doesn't get seen or doesn't get changed because there's just not that lived experience there. And so that was so what Let Her Speak became was focusing on women's wealth, power, and influence. Was ultimately what I came out of the pandemic learning and understanding. And so that's the trajectory that we've been on ever since. I think I had the aha in late 2020. And so that's really what we've been changing our programming and changing what we do. So now that we have Let Her Lead leadership development program for both aspiring and established women leaders, because you need both, and both need to be working together with each other. They shouldn't be kept separate. We need each other to help each other out, and we all can have something that we can offer, regardless of how long you've been in a position or whether you're just getting started. There's always a new perspective. Let Her Invest Women Building Wealth is our monthly meetup that we are now working and helping women with understanding money and finances and the wellness and trauma behind money, of how we're taught about it, how we're talked to about money, and undoing some of those, and recognizing that money is not inherently evil. If it's in the wrong hands, it can be, but that's why we need it in the right hands, and we need it in more hands of women that have that heart and that center around community to be able to make those changes. And also, if you become an investor and invest in these other businesses that are not getting funding right now but can do so much good in a community, right. They can build up communities, they can create jobs in communities, whether it's technology or a product or a service, there's a lot of good that could be done for an unserved market. But we need more different types of voices in rooms where investment decisions are being made in order for that money to go to those organizations and those companies, because otherwise you have a group that are just sitting there like, I don't get it, I don't understand why this is a problem. Yes. It's like, well, because you've never lived that problem. But let me tell you, it is. Yeah. It is for a percentage of us. And so that's really where we've changed and pivoted.
What do you want your legacy to be?
You're putting my own question
back
at me.
That's how I want to wrap it up. Yeah. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be lived out through and perpetuated through the women that are connected to the work that I do. My husband always shared this fable with me years ago, and it's always stuck with me, of this fable of two different professors. The professor that was all about the accolades and the titles and the notoriety and being celebrated for his work. And he had students that worked for him that he felt that it was just a privilege being able to work with him. And so he never invested in them. He never did anything. It was just, you got to be a part of my team, so therefore that should be enough. And then the professor that could care less about all of that and wanted to just invest into these students for them to go out and be able to do good work and do amazing things. And when these two professors passed away, the professor that had all the accolades, was in the magazines, everybody knew who he was, none of his students showed up to speak about the work that he did or the impact that he had. The other professor, hundreds and hundreds of students showed up to vocalize how much he changed the way that they do their work and the work that they were able to do because of him. And so that's always been, in my mind, the legacy of, I want to be that person that all of these people would come out of the woodwork of, you all might not know this, but this is how she helped change my life. Wow. And that's the legacy I want, is I don't need to be in the magazines. I don't need to be a best-selling author. I don't need any of that. But if hundreds of folks would show up and can speak to how I directly impacted their life, that is the legacy I want to have.
Catherine Porth, you are amazing. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are awesome.